like in the San Bernardino area. Oops, San Bernardino area. This one works nice. You know what? I was going to show my video on Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Code. I had done a presentation on it. It's really neat. But Rabbi will, huh? Yeah, well, Rabbi was supposed to work in here. Now she's sick. Rabbi Alexander has the flu. Not COVID, but the flu. Hey, I can't even do it. Yeah, the kids do their painting and things on it. That's why all the stains. You should put a tablecloth. I'll ask Lourdes if she can put a tablecloth there. I'll ask her. Lourdes? Lourdes? How is it? Is it still expensive or more expensive? She's more expensive, I know. When it comes to the kiddishes here, or the kiddishim, I guess you'd say. They're, well, I know, but see, I know, but Andres, who's our regular caterer, is very reasonable. He's been able to keep the prices down. I don't know how he does it. No.
Oh, I don't know. Next time I don't have to go to Starbucks. I get
No,
latte.
you can get, we pay for this. We pay through the nose. But we want to have coffee and goodies for you. Makes it nicer.
But if I want a latte, I can go to the
Oh, the latte, you go over there, yeah. Anyway, Hello. So, that's okay. So we'll get a tablecloth.
I mean, I can get
Hello. Good morning. How are you? Always good, even if I'm not. Good for you. That's a very. You know what? I always tell her.
She's not here. I wonder how this works.
It's much better to really need to. Then it starts to wear off.
Yeah.
We don't care.
I mean, really,
We can't fix the weather. We can't fix the weather white.
And you know what? We can't fix a lot of other things too.
Did you go to Temple last night for that program? Did you go to the Temple last night for that program? There was a program on Israel's problems with the
No, that's next Tuesday.
Oh, so I didn't go last night. I was.
Next
It's next Tuesday. Oh.
You're okay, because you know what? On Monday,
Yeah.
I tuned in to, a music program, a dance program, and I couldn't get it. I tried, then I called her,
Rabbi, thank you for a cover.
she couldn't get it. So I finally.
Just normally I can't, but it worked out today. My student pencil.
The last
So
program.
right after.
It's all right.
Yeah, right.
Did you drive a motorcycle here, Rabbi?
Today, but it's going to be mailed to you. Our president signed off. I'm not sure. Susan went to Susan's sick. Yep. So, now, and then we'll add this one.
we good to go? Okay. Any chance we could close that door? I think it will eliminate some of the noise. No, I know, but that door, since it's open,
You know what, you're absolutely right.
I think it might.
Thank you very much.
Of course, of
And
course.
you know what, I want to say one last thing. So Rosie always says Rabbi Goodman could teach anything in the universe. She does. And you know what? We all agree.
Thank you so much.
No, it's true.
You know what? I love being a teacher of things. I teach singing. I teach Jewish studies. I love teaching, and the way, sort of my philosophy always is, I put myself in your shoes, and it's like, okay, how do I want someone to teach me? And then as I'm going through all this material, I'm always thinking about what questions will they ask me? They're going to ask me about this. They're going to ask about this. I better be able to talk about this. What's this about?
For adults, but not with kids, you don't know what you're going
That's true. That's true. They could go everywhere. So are we streaming today?
Yeah, we're streaming today, 2 classes. Rabbi Alexander is ill today, not feeling, super. And so we asked Rabbi Goodman to teach 2 classes, and we're happy. We're happy about that.
So you are stuck with me all morning.
Well, not a warning, it's a pleasure.
And it actually, God is so very, very smart. I had planned my lesson plan out for our first hour, and then I got this message from Rosalie, just a little bit ago. Can you stay for the second hour?
Susie is saying she can't hear the rabbi.
Well, I'm on the mic. I don't know what. Yeah. So then it occurred to me, we have to get to Napoleon today in order to finish up France. Obviously, Napoleon is very, very important. And so what I did was I printed up a few pages, of which I will read excerpts from my last paper that I wrote on Napoleon and the Tsars, and it was published in the International Journal of Russian Studies. So we're gonna go into detail when we get to Napoleon, because it's very interesting. Before, if I was just going to do the hour, I would have had to fly over him a little bit. But now we can get in there because he's very interesting and in his situation with the Jews. Okay, so last week we ended with the Jews being expelled from France in 1182. When Philip Augustus becomes king in 1198, he allows them to return. And we had a period of relatively good Jewish relations with the crown. And as we're going to see over the next few minutes, it's going to be good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, depending on which king comes onto the throne. So in 1223, Louis VIII cancels the interest on Jewish debt. He's being sort of nice to the Jews. So if the Jews owed something, he canceled their debt, which was nice. He only reigns for 3 years, though. And when Louis IX, his son, comes on the throne in 1226, we have the burning of the Talmuds in 1234. And the Christian position on the Talmud was that it had a number of anti-Christian messages, and it had a number of derogatory statements about Jesus. None of these things is actually true. The Talmud is not at all overtly anti-Christian. There are only a few statements about Jesus, and the only real statements in there are regarding his trial. And so the Christians were looking for a pretext to come after, and they ordered the burning. Louis IX ordered the burning of the Talmuds. He left for the Seventh Crusade in 1248, and in order to finance the crusade, he confiscated all the property of the Jews, and he sold it, and he kept the money and put it into the crown so he could finance the crusade. In 1273, the Inquisition comes to southern France. And by 1278, the Jews of Toulouse, who had buried a Christian convert. So it didn't happen a lot, but here and there Christians did convert to Judaism. It was mostly the other way around, if it happened, in order to save Jewish lives. They sometimes converted to Christianity. I think we all sort of understand that. It's one of the things people are not supposed to do. You're supposed to die rather than convert. But we understand the human condition, and if any of us were in that position, we'd sort of understand, is it my life, or am I going to say that I'm a Christian now? So this happened in reverse. A Christian converted to Judaism, and then this person died. And so this person then was buried in a Jewish cemetery. Well, that infuriated the Christian population, and it infuriated Pope Gregory IX, who had issued a warning about Jews speaking to anybody about Judaism, trying to proselytize in any way, shape, or form, and also Jewish-Christian relations, that there was still some animosity. And so Pope Gregory IX, because of that warning, there was great anti-Semitic sentiment in France at the time, and because of this Christian convert, it was a sort of like I don't want to say the straw that broke the camel's back, but it was a precipitating event. And the community was brought before the Inquisitor Tribunal, and Rabbi Isaac Males, M-A-L-E-S, I'm guessing it's Males, was condemned to die, and they burned him at the stake, which was the penalty for Jews who had who converted to Christianity but who were deemed heretics. It's very strange that they burned a Jew at the stake, because that wasn't the penalty. But he was, I guess, for his sort of, they felt he was colluding in order to seduce people from Christianity. In 1306, and this one's kind of big, Philip the Fair comes onto the throne, and France's treasuries are empty. And so what he does was he kicks all the Jews out of France. He exiles and he banishes the Jews. He confiscates all their property. He sells it to get the treasury reimbursed. The only place Jews were able to go at that time were Alsace-Lorraine, which you'll see in the upper right, Alsace-Lorraine. And that's because right next door is Germany. And so there were different populations of Jews in France at the time. Portuguese Jews, also French Jews, and the ones in Alsace-Lorraine were more German Jews, because Alsace-Lorraine has always been sort of a territory on the border, right? When I finished high school, my parents, as a graduation present, let me study in Strasbourg for about 2 weeks. And I was able to do it because my French was really, really good. And so I lived with a family there for a couple of weeks. And I remember them taking me into the Vosges Mountains for picnics and that kind of thing. But it was a beautiful area, yes.
When we were stationed in Germany, we used to go to Strasbourg, France to get our kosher meat.
Joette says when you were stationed in Germany, you used to go to Strasbourg to get kosher meat. Yeah, Strasbourg and Alsace-Lorraine had a very strong Jewish population. Did I stay with a Jewish family? No. My trip had nothing to do with Judaism. I didn't grow up very religious. My parents weren't very religious. We celebrated all the, Passover every year and Hanukkah and all that. And I went to Hebrew school and had bar mitzvah, everything. But we weren't overly religious. I didn't sort of become involved until later, much later in my life, when I was going to adopt my first son and I was looking for daycare. So Gary says a number of conservative rabbis that he has met grew up not so religious and then found more religion later in life. I can't say I can't label myself a conservative rabbi anymore. I don't like all the labels. I'm a Jewish rabbi who. So what is adopting my son? We're off topic for a little bit, but I'll just go through it quickly. What happened was when I decided to adopt Zach from China, the paperwork took a year before I could fly over and get him. And I started looking for daycare because he was 18 months. And so I started looking at the various synagogues first. And Temple Emmanuel on the hill had a daycare. But the temple, which is literally walking distance from my home, Beth Emet, they didn't have a daycare at the time. But I was trying to find out if they did, and no one had answered the phone, so I attended a Friday night service. And I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. I like this. Say again? Mark Sobel. And so I ended up going every Friday night. And I thought, okay, this is I was young-ish. I was still going out here and there, having fun with friends, And I thought, this is a really good way to ground me on Friday nights. Get in there, talk to God for a little bit, get a good perspective, and then. Anyway, long story short, the rabbi couldn't sing. I went up to him one night and said, can I help you? And he said, yes. So I started singing Friday nights. He was the rabbi, I was the lay cantor, whatever we called it. I started singing. They loved me. I had no idea what I was doing. I was using all the wrong melodies. They were using all the wrong, but they loved me. And then, I don't know, about part of the way through that journey, I just said, I really like this. I want to learn more. So I got a referral to Sam Fortis, and then I just started studying with Sam for many years before I went to and then the rest of the story about me becoming a rabbi. So, all right. So Philip the Fair banishes all the Jews from France, and the only place that they are safe is Alsace-Lorraine, and that's because that region was sort of in dispute at the time. It was technically outside the realm of the king, but it was still sort of within French territory, heavily influenced by German ideals. Gary says Germany and France fought over that territory in World War I. Very good, yes. So in 1315, Louis X comes onto the throne. The other one was 1306 when Philip the Fair. 1315, 9 years later, Louis X comes onto the throne. And he says that Jews, you can come back, but you are restricted to any kind of manual labor or selling of merchandise, and you have to wear a round badge that identifies you as a Jew. He, within that, pawnbroking and money lending was allowed, but Louis X put a limit on how much the Jews could earn from that. And then in 1394, guess what? They're expelled again. They're expelled again under Charles VI. And what he said was, when Louis X brought you back, there were certain conditions that you had to meet in order to be here. And I have decided that you have reneged on all those promises, that there are excesses and there are misdemeanors, and they violated the agreement, so out you go again. Okay. And the Jews, the history of the Jews up until the 1600s, so that was 1394, basically 1400. So for approximately 200 years, we don't hear about Jews in France. Starting in the 1600s, the Jews begin to re-enter France. That leads to anti-Semitism among the population. And in 1615, there's an edict that comes forth that Christians cannot give shelter to or even converse with Jews. No contact with Jews whatsoever. Again, at this time, most of the Jews came back and they lived in Alsace-Lorraine because that was a safe place for them. Luckily, in the 1700s, sort of a spirit of tolerance began. By the 1780s, there were 40 to 50,000 Jews in France, and they were living, along with Alsace-Lorraine, they were living in Metz in the very north and Bordeaux in the very south. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it was way up in the north or way down in the south, because most of the population, as you know, was right in the middle, since Paris was there. And so the Jews were safer at the extremes. And in 1789, the Jewish question comes before the Assembly, and this is the year of the French Revolution, 1789. And we have a very famous statement by Count Clermont-Tonnerre. And this is a statement you should probably file in the back of your head because it's very, very famous. He says, "We must refuse everything to the Jews as a nation, but accord everything to the Jew as an individual." So we're going to talk a lot about that in a few minutes. Basically, what the policy of the French was, and Napoleon's policy was, if you want to become a citizen of France, you have to give up your claim to the Jewish people as a Jewish nation. You have to give that up because we're not interested in that. You don't have a homeland. This is what you have to say is, I am a French citizen first, and I happen to practice a religion that's called Judaism. I am a French Jew rather than a Jewish French person. All right. So I want to go through, because this is right where my paper starts, let me go through some excerpts which will shed more light on this. The battle cry of the French Revolution, which, as we all know, was liberty, equality, and fraternity, was made manifest for French Jews on August 26, 1789, with a document that's called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen by the French National Assembly. One wonderful thing we have in the corpus of Jewish literature, especially by an author named Mendez, is that he has put together all of the documents through history of pertaining to the Jews by country. It's a great work and was essential. The French Revolution had potentially abolished the different legal statuses of people based on religion and origin that existed under the French monarchy. So when we say liberty and equality, that's what the French Revolution established for France. Not so many distinctions among the classes. And so Jews were brought in to the mix then because they were a significant population. After several years of turmoil, the French National Assembly passed a law that seemed to give Jews the rights of French citizenship. Here's what the document says. All men are born and remain free and equal in rights. No person shall be molested for his opinions, even such as are religious, provided that the manifestation of these opinions does not disturb the public order established by law. So Jews could be Jews as long as they didn't go out and create problems within the population. It's not like under Islam, where Jews had to be second-class citizens and be very, very quiet and not do. It's not like that. It's just Jews couldn't do anything that would disrupt the civil laws. Okay, well, that was easy for us. We don't do anything like that anyway.
Well, Rabbi, I have a question. During the revolution, that's when people were guillotined. Were any Jews killed in that manner at all?
Not to my knowledge. No, they didn't. It didn't. Rosie asked a question about the guillotine was used as a means of execution during the French Revolution. The guillotine was mostly used on the elite French class by the bourgeoisie in order to equalize the classes. You know, this was clearly, there have been several interpretations of Marie Antoinette's let them eat cake. But the way we understand it in modern terms is, look, I'm so far above you, let them have cake, okay? And the French Revolution came along to eliminate that large distinction between the very wealthy and the poor. Unfortunately, the National Assembly ultimately could not agree on whether the Jews were actually included in this statement that every person had the right. On December 23, 1789, Clermont de Tonnerre gave a speech on the floor of the National Assembly, he advocated the Jews to be included as citizens, which is the statement that I just read you. Among his many arguments, his position that the Jews should be denied everything as a nation, but granted everything as individuals, became the official position of Napoleon and the French Empire in the years that followed. The relinquishment of a national identity would be required for Jews to obtain citizenship as individuals. You have to give up your claim to Judaism as a people. I'm a member of the Jewish people. Nope, I'm French. I'm a Frenchman, I'm a French woman, and I practice a religion that's called Judaism. I'm loyal to France first. Yes?
In 1980, there was a bomb in Paris. There was a synagogue. And the prime minister, not the president, said something to the effect that the bomb was intended for Jews in the synagogue, but instead they killed innocent Frenchmen. Which kind of differs from...
So what's your name? Jim says that in 1980, which is very true, there was a synagogue bombing at the Rue Copernic Synagogue, and it was carried out by neo-Nazis. And the comment was that at the time, the French president said, Prime Minister, said that the bombing went after Jews in the synagogue, not innocent French citizens. I don't know about that particular statement, but it sounds terrible if that was the case. And so it's antithetical to what we just talked about. Yes, absolutely it is. French nationalism, as the revolutionaries conceived it, was assimilatory, meaning they wanted the Jews to abandon any sense of belonging to a separate nation and aspirations for renewed sovereignty in the land of Israel. They didn't want the Jews to always be thinking about, you know, we're living here in France, but our real home is in Palestine. And so as soon as we get the chance, we're going to abandon France and we're going to go to Palestine. The French government said, well, then, no, we don't want you as citizens if that's your thinking. Your thinking has to be, I'm loyal to France. Forget this Palestine, forget this homeland, forget this other stuff. Now, not everyone agreed. Anne Lois Henry de la Fère, the Bishop of Nancy, argued that the Jews were hated by all, and granting them citizenship would spark an enormous fire. That's in quotations. So at that point, the debate remained unsettled until 1790, when the Jews of Alsace and Lorraine petitioned the National Assembly for French citizenship. Their petition was denied. The National Assembly had granted citizenship to the Jews of Avignon and the Sephardim. So remember, the Jews of Avignon were French Jews. The Sephardim were Jews who had come from the Portuguese Jews, basically. And then you had the German Jews in Alsace-Lorraine. They weren't going to get it right away. The minority Sephardim and Jews of Avignon were the descendants of conversos who had migrated to France in the 16th century. They spoke French, they dressed like French men and women, they had business relationships with their Christian neighbors. So they were basically assimilated. And this is going to become important as we go through history. As such, the National Assembly regarded the Sephardim as having a different social standing from the Ashkenazim, and therefore as being distinct among French Jews. So these Sephardim were already integrated into society. The Ashkenazim, the German French Jews, were not so integrated into French society. And so basically the National Assembly was saying, you guys are okay. We're not interested in you. The Constitution, in 1791, the language of equality was added to the French Constitution. The Constitution guarantees as national and civil rights liberty to every man to exercise the religious worship to which he is attached. And 25 days later, on September 28, 1791, the Ashkenazim of France got their liberty. Their new status, however, came with a proviso. That is, the Jews of France had to renounce all privileges in their favor. Okay, we've just been talking about that. They had to give up being a part of the Jewish people. Napoleon understood the strong connections that Jews felt to both their religion and the concept of peoplehood. And he understood the primacy of Jewish law in the exercise of daily life, that halakha was important to many Jews. Napoleon understood this. He didn't question that French Jews were willing to accede to the requirements of French citizenship. What concerned him was whether Jewish law would interfere. So he believed the Jews when they said, okay, we're going to give up this business of peoplehood and become French citizens. But Napoleon was very suspect. Can you really do that? Will halakha let you do that? There was a general feeling that the existence of multiple religions within a single state that would agree to the validity of civil law was both possible and achievable. And for Judaism in particular, that granting of civil and political rights came to the Jews out of belief that there were no irreconcilable conditions between the spirit of Judaism and French civilization. So ultimately what they decided was, look, if you're a Jew, the essence of what you believe doesn't conflict with our laws and our society. Cool, we're okay. That was the ultimate idea. So Napoleon was promoted to captain of the French army in 1792, and to the general in 1795. He installed himself as first consul, and then, let me skip down here. He is the general, and he initiates a campaign. His Italian campaign, he marches through 19 cities. In 1795, he invades the Netherlands. Napoleon becomes emperor in 1804, following a coup that he didn't instigate, but he did take full advantage of in order to change the constitution of France and have himself declared emperor. He led the French army through victories all through Europe, and basically wherever Napoleon went and whatever places he conquered, he freed the Jews of that area. So the Jew. So the question is, how was he so learned about the Jews? Good question. I don't know. Did he have Jewish advisors? You know, I'll look that up a little bit more. Yeah, that's a good question. The Jews of Padua, Italy, gained partial emancipation through Napoleon's victory. The revolutions of 1848 in Italy had brought political upheaval throughout Europe. So you know that the French Revolution of 1789 began a cascade of other revolutions and other events and other leanings of the populace to gain freedom from monarchies. Napoleon had called for an assembly of the Jewish notables on May 30th, 1806, to achieve and revive, among individuals of the Jewish persuasion residing in our dominions, sentiments of civil morality which have been stifled. So what does Napoleon do? He reconvenes what's called the Great Sanhedrin. Can anyone tell me what the Sanhedrin was? This is very important. We should know this word. A body of Jewish judges. Very good. Pretty close. Almost. Jerusalem. Very good. Connected to the temple. Very good. In the Second Temple period, when is the Second Temple period? From the time the Jews are allowed to return under Cyrus in 539 up until the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. So 539 BCE to 70 CE is the Second Temple period. This was a very rich period of Jewish history. There were different kinds of Judaisms, different sects, different... The Great Sanhedrin was established, and there was a Great Sanhedrin which functioned sort of like our Supreme Court that had 71 elders. An odd number, because if it were 70, you could have 35 to 35. So it's always an odd number, for the same reason that we have, 9 justices on the Supreme Court. Always an odd number, always. So they had the Great Sanhedrin of 71, who would take up the very, very highest of cases, and they functioned sort of like our Supreme Court. Then there was something called the Lesser Sanhedrin, and that had 23 judges. Again, odd number for the same reason. And they would take up more municipal conflicts. So the same thing we have here. We have municipal court, we have superior court, we have federal court, and then we have Supreme Court, right? All right. And it existed in Jerusalem as Rosalie said, up until the destruction of the Second Temple, at which time the Sanhedrin moved up into the Galilee, which is in the north of Israel, and it was disbanded ultimately in 425 CE. So, Sanhedrin is a term we should know about as Jews. The Sanhedrin was a very, very large court of law, 71 judges, and it was during the Second Temple period. Well, Napoleon revived the Sanhedrin, and he called together a congregation of Jewish notables, and it was handpicked, a group who he counted on to lead the Jews under his rule to citizenship and ultimately to assimilation. That's always the goal, assimilation, right? Absorb the Jews, get them to start acting more like us, and they won't be more like they. Yes, it solves the problem, and it's been done, it has been tried throughout history to get us to do this. But it never worked. But this time it did work a little bit. Why? Because the carrot that Napoleon dangled in front of the Jewish community was really big. You get your citizenship. You get to vote. You get to own property. You get to, all kinds of rights, civil rights within the country. That was huge. It was big enough for the Jews to say, okay, all right, okay. The Sanhedrin was reconvened on January 31st, 1807, and after 2 months of deliberation, Judaism became an officially recognized religion within French territory. So by 1807, Judaism was, you were good to be a Jew. It was fine. It was a recognized national religion. Now, this is interesting. The Sanhedrin, citing the rabbinic principle of Dina de Malchuta Dina, the law of the land is the law, acceded to Napoleon's demand to renounce the Jewish claim to nationhood and to pledge their allegiance to France. So, there was this is in Aramaic, there was a principle within our tradition started in the Middle Ages, and was called Dina de Malchuta Dina. Joette, do you know this at all? Tell me about it.
I don't know how it started, but I do know that it means that whatever is the government of the land that you live in, their laws are in effect in that land, and we need to follow those laws.
Good, excellent. So once the Jews, so Joette said, wherever you live, the laws, as a Jew, the laws of that land are in effect for you. And that's correct. So basically what it said, because Jews by this time, by the Middle Ages, had gone everywhere, had moved out into everywhere. And the rabbis understood, some places they're going to have laws that conflict a little bit. And the rabbi said, look, in order for you to preserve your life, in order for you to preserve your communities, in order for you to exist in whatever country you are, you have to abide by the civil law of that country. And if it means that the civil law of that country violates Jewish law, you gotta do it. Now, so if we take an absurd example, like you live in a country that says Jews have to eat, that everybody has to eat pork on Sundays, okay, by law, then Jews would have had to do that. So the idea is, whatever the civil law of that country is, it takes precedence over Jewish law. And that's in order to allow you to exist in that place. And it's called Dina de Malchuta Dina. Dina, the law, de Malchuta, of the kingdom. Dina de Malchuta Dina is the law. Is there such a place that says you have to eat pork on Sundays? No. I'm just saying, I was trying to pick the most ridiculous example I could think of in order to demonstrate the principle. Wait, let's go here. But it's also saving your life by following, which is commanded. Yes, absolutely. Joette?
But there are countries currently, I don't remember, in Scandinavia, I believe, but I'm not 100% sure, that are trying to outlaw our method of shechita, of slaughtering animals, which would, yeah, I knew it was, yeah, and I don't think it has happened, but it has been brought up.
So Joette says that there are countries in Scandinavia, and I think it was Sweden, that is trying to outlaw the Jewish methods of shechita, of how to ritually slaughter an animal. I guess they figure it's barbaric.
Yes, it's part of what they feel is how we treat animals.
It's part of what they feel how we treat animals. So they're trying to have it outlawed.
I know that's already happened in some places in France, but with slaughtering, you at least can get meat from someplace else. Or it's come up recently with regard to Brittany law. There's discussion that could be banned.
Was it Joe? Your name? Jim. I knew it was a J. So now I won't forget. And Jim says it has happened in France as well. When we get down to it, we're going to find out there are a whole bunch of Jews from northern Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria. These were French colonies who make up a huge part of the current French Jewish population. And there are a number of Arab Muslims who live in France as well. Now, you would think, because Islam has halal, and halal is very, 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 very close to kashrut, that there wouldn't be such a problem. But apparently, yes, Ken. Islam does not accept which rule?
The rule that you go by the local law.
Oh, Islam does not accept the rule that you go by the local law. That doesn't surprise me at all. Does it surprise anybody here? I mean, we Jews have had to adapt throughout our entire history to wherever we were in order to survive. Islam had a very different mentality from day one. It's our way or the highway, and that's it. Okay, so the Sanhedrin used that principle in order to talk to the Jews about letting go of their claim on peoplehood and becoming French citizens. The Sanhedrin affirmed it was commendable for Jews to become tradesmen and farmers and to give up professions, money lending, and specifically the idea of usury, the charging of excessive interest, which Jews had to do for centuries. Why did Jews have to do that for centuries? Because remember, we're living in a feudal society. Feudal meaning there are nobles and there are peasants. And the Jews were property of the nobles. And the nobles said, you're going to be my tax collectors, and you're going to make loans to people. Because Christians were not allowed to do that with other Christians. Why? Because our Testament, our Bible says Jews are not allowed to charge interest from other Jews. And the Christians looked at that and said, okay, look, we are the new I can't think of the word, but we are the new Israel. The Christians said, we are the new Israel. So Christians cannot charge interest from other Christians. It was considered usury, exactly, excessive. But who could charge interest from the Christians? Jews. So that's what we did. And then what happened was the nobility said, you know, my stuff's getting really expensive here. Inflation, everything's going up. Charge them more interest. Get more money for me. And the Jews had to charge more interest. So it was a matter of survival again. But Napoleon's project, the idea of the Great Sanhedrin, faced opposition. Tsar Alexander I of Russia, among others, protested vehemently to Napoleon's intentions of emancipating French Jews. So Alexander I, not nice to Jews. Nicholas, his son, very not nice to Jews. Forced conscription into the army until you're 25, indoctrination into Eastern Orthodox Christian. His son, Alexander II, Tsar Alexander II, pretty good to Jews. Pretty good to Jews. Tolerable, at least. But he's the one who's assassinated. And that causes all the pogroms. So, on the day that Judaism was recognized as a French religion, Napoleon enacted the Décret Infâme, the infamous decree which restricted Jewish money lending, canceled all the debts owed to the Jews by Gentile debtors. You can imagine that puts everybody out of business. I've made all these loans with all my money, and now they don't have to pay me back. I'm out all this money. So, I'll finish with this. Napoleon's attitude towards the Jews is at best unclear. During his reign, he made a number of conflicting statements about his real intentions. It would seem that his official statements supported a benevolent interpretation of his motives, meaning that it would seem when he spoke in public, Napoleon was trying to be nice to the Jews. However, his private statements indicated a much more subversive intention. Napoleon's outward tolerance and fairness towards Jews was actually based on his grand plan to have them disappear entirely by means of total assimilation, intermarriage, and conversion. Let's see, I want to skip down here. On June 23, 1806, at a public meeting of the Jewish elders, Napoleon said, "My desire is to make Jews equal citizens in France, have a conciliation between their religion and their responsibilities in becoming French, and to answer all the accusations made against them. I want all the people living in France to be equal citizens and benefit from our laws." Well, that sounds wonderful, right? But in his private correspondence that I was able to search out and find, in a letter to the Minister of the Interior in the same year, he said, "It is necessary to reduce, if not destroy, the tendency of Jewish people to practice a very great number of activities that are harmful to civilization and to public order in society in all the countries of the world. It is necessary to stop the harm by preventing it. To prevent it, it is necessary to change the Jews. Once part of their youth will take its place in our armies, they will cease to have Jewish interests and sentiments. Their interests and sentiments will be French." Very insidious. So Napoleon was kind of duplicitous. You know, we always say, "Oh, great, Napoleon, we got our freedom. Well, that was what he portrayed to everyone else. His real intention, assimilate them, and they'll stop. At least he didn't kill them. That is for sure. I was just going to say, it is now about just slightly after 10 of, so it's break time, everyone. Yes. Can you bring it up, or do you want me to bring it up? Yes. Oh, wait, you have to tell us about this, sir. Come forward, please. Come here. This is fantastic. Yes, I'm just going to do that right now. We'll bring you the mic. Sir, we have to hear about this. This is tremendous. What's your name? Herbert Moore. Okay, Herb, you have to tell us all about this. This is incredible. Sit down and tell us about this.
During World War II, I was a member of the 280th Engineer Combat Battalion, and we fought in the battle of, called the Battle of the Bulge.
The Battle of the Bulge. You fought in the Battle of the Bulge.
And we fought in France, Luxembourg, Germany, and Germany. After the war, I was awarded the French Medal of Honor. The ceremony took place here at Daguerreotypes, and it's awarded by the French government. Application is made by other people, and it has to go all the way back to France for approval. And we had a ceremony, 5 of us were awarded here at Daguerreotypes. The other thing I wanted to mention.
This was a medal that was brought into existence by Napoleon. That was the impetus for the question.
I was in France in 2018, and I went to, they have a museum of the French Medal of Honor, and my name is there.
Your name is there.
And I have relatives in France who fought in the underground. He had they call it a biscuit plant, it's a cookie factory, and the Vichy government threw him out of it, and he joined the partisans in the mountains.
The Vichy government, we're going to talk about that after the break. You have relatives, and you threw them out, and they went into the mountains.
And fought with the underground.
And fought with the underground.
And then when the war was over, he came back and threw the person they put in charge of that factory out of the factory and took it over.
Fantastic.
And I met them all. I met them in France. And we're having a reunion this summer in North Carolina.
A reunion this summer in North Carolina.
Of the Moore family.
Of the Moore family.
From all over, from Argentina.
Oh my goodness, from all different countries.
All over the United States.
That is an incredible story, Herb.
Well done. Wow. Wow.
And you should know that Herb is celebrating his 99th birthday.
Yay!
March 25th at the Shabbat service.
Oh, Gary, here.
March 25th at the Shabbat service here. Herb is being honored on his 99th birthday. Everybody needs to be there.
Wow. That is tremendous.
It's amazing to hear this story because I have an uncle, who also got the French Medal of Honor.
And it's amazing to hear this story because you have an Uncle Herb who also got the French Medal of Honor.
He served over there and he brought back a French wife.
He served over there and brought back a French wife. She made her dress out of parachute material. Wow. What a great story. And Herb, thank you so much. What an incredible story. How honored we are. Wonderful. Okay, everyone, take a break. It's 11 o'clock, so we'll come back.
There's the Wikipedia thing about the French.
Raymond Barr authors an odious bombing order to strike Jews who were in synagogue and hit innocent French people across the Copernic Street. A Freudian slip. As assuring his Jewish mission sympathy of all nations failed to assuage both words, definitely were attributed campaign of protestations to the Jewish lobby. Interesting. Thank you. That's great.
Little sidebar. They were talking about the guillotine. In France, it was considered nasty to operate the guillotine, so it was restricted to one family. And at the time of the French Revolution, there was only one person left in the family.
Oh my God.
So there was only one guillotine, and he went everywhere with the guillotine.
Oh my God.
So how many people they could kill was actually limited. And he didn't get married, so he has no descendants. So
Oh, good. So you know what? When we come back, I want you to tell that story. Okay?
yeah, there was a whole special about him.
Great.
You know, it seems to me, Rabbi, that all through history, every time you speak about different eras, they're always connected to money.
Always. Well, the big bankers.
See, and we were in Germany from 85 to 88, and we went to Strasbourg, France to get our kosher meat.
I could
So,
have been before, or maybe there was more price or financial change.
It is true. Why?
yeah, so I'm not sure. I would imagine today's France would be more likely to outlaw it, but,
They're very educated people.
but I don't know, because most of,
Like this, so of
from what I
course, they're gonna be
read,
the money.
it seems that the current anti-Semitism in France is led by Muslims.
Right.
But they wouldn't want to outlaw Shmita because that's how they, so,
I don't think they're trying to single out the Muslims or the Jews. I don't think they're racist.
no,
They're-
no, it's just this, it's a type, yeah.
I once asked Jonathan Bernhardt what he would think if he's vegan anyway. But, I think we still stand by that concept
The problem is not slaughtering yourself, the problem is getting the animal into the equipment that, because they have to get them into the equipment turned upside down.
all the time, so it's not an issue.
I really like it, but I have no responsibility, so it's now yours.
I will give it to her.
You can tell, I try to be simple-minded. As I get older, I want less responsibility.
Absolutely, that's good. Well, I was told by Susie that she can't hear all the questions because she's streaming. I'll make it an issue.
So you didn't miss it, it's next Tuesday.
Oh, okay.
We already signed up.
What I'm doing next Tuesday. I'll have to look and see what I'm.
We're coming back, we'll be away for 2 days up to Joshua Tree. We'll set up at the, and I mentioned that we're gonna leave on back here on Tuesday. I'm not driving, so I'm just volunteer to drive for us. And I said, I remember I have to be back by 6 p.m.
Well, I would stay, but do we have a
Do
set?
whatever they want that day. They want to
Oh,
drop me off and pick me up.
I would stay if we're playing. So I wanted to ask you, for a short period of time.
Hello, hello. I have an announcement. Hello? Anybody paying attention to me? Thank you. Susie called and said she's streaming. Susie is streaming, and she said that she would like us to use a mic if anybody has a comment or question, because she cannot always hear. Even though the rabbi tries to summarize questions, sometimes she says it isn't a complete comment that she hears. So anyway, so I'm going to take the mic to you if you need to make a comment or ask a question.
You need a portable microphone that you can pass.
I know. It would be good if the only portable ones we have are the ones the rabbinic staff use. They put it over their head and it doesn't work. Anyway, that was Susie. So,
Does that mean we're starting again?
yeah, we can start again. And Susie called me and said that she would like people to give comments on the mic, because she said sometimes she really wants to hear the whole comments that people.
I'm repeating. Yeah,
I know you are.
Can you tell her I'm repeating the whole?
So Susie, Rabbi says that he repeats the questions, so or the comments, and I think he does a fantastic job.
I'm repeating exactly what they say.
Absolutely, I know. Okay, well, yeah, right. So Susie, I'll try.
Thank you. In which 7 successive countries are living in at the time in the kingdom of Arab, Holy Roman Empire, France, and the French death of Pope, and further death. Yeah, but I'm sure that had a huge effect. Yeah. Yeah, that's very good.
I remember, because I had no idea until we visited Avignon and learned about all of this.
Sure.
Okay, we're ready for Rabbi Goodman Part 2.
Okay, so we just learned a whole lot about Napoleon. And, okay, so starting in the 1880s, so remember if in terms of general dates, 1800, Napoleon. 1789 is the French Revolution, so you could say 1800, French Revolution, Napoleon. Okay. Anti-Semitism is on the rise in France, and especially sort of the impetus for that is the success of the Rothschilds, because they were considered by anti-Semites an alien Jewish presence. And we know the Rothschilds were incredibly powerful in the banking industry, and they were incredibly powerful Jewish family. And there were three strands of anti-Semitism that arose. The first strand labeled the Jews as killers of Jesus. Okay, we've been doing that for a whole lot of years. The second strand objected to the Jews because they were, especially the Rothschilds, because they were so involved in capitalism and capitalistic ideas. And of course, these people were socialists themselves who were accusing the Jews of extreme capitalism. And then there were some who were against the Jews because it was a form of racism. So we see the very, very, very beginnings before World War II that there were already some racist ideas that the Jews were sort of a disgusting people. In 1894, basically 1900, we have a very, very, very huge event, and you should all know a tiny bit about this. Not you should know now, but after we talk about it, you should be able to talk for 10 seconds on this. And this is the Dreyfus Affair. Okay, who can tell me about the Dreyfus Affair? You know what? Hold on. Maybe this one is good for Judy. Yeah.
No, he was an
He was a captain. He was an officer. He was a captain.
Yeah, you're right. He was
It's okay.
a captain in the French army.
This is Dreyfus.
Dreyfus. Yeah. He was assimilated, considered himself Jewish, French, but he was a Jew, and he was falsely accused of some kind of
Spying.
yes, yeah, spying, and there was this big process with him, and he was sent, I don't know to which island. Devil's Island, and Zola was Emile Zola, the French writer, was the one who wrote J'accuse.
Yes. Yes,
which
that's
was
correct.
a book about Dreyfus Affair, and that it was all made up. Yeah.
Okay.
Baseless.
Very good, very good. Yes, essentially that's correct. So the Dreyfus Affair, we should know this. So the Dreyfus Affair has to do with Captain Alfred Dreyfus in the French army. And he was convicted of treason, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment on Devil's Island, which is in French Guiana. And French Guiana is in the very, very northeast corner of South America. So if we have South America, French Guiana is right here, and Devil's Island is right there. It's not a nice place. So what he had been accused of was communicating military secrets to the German embassy in Paris. So he was, again, sent to Devil's Island. In 1896, some information, so this was in 1894. So 2 years after that, some information emerged that a man named Ferdinand Esterhazy was actually the real spy. And the military ended up covering it up, and Esterhazy was acquitted. And that led to, as you correctly pointed out, the very famous French writer Émile Zola. He writes a treatise called J'accuse, I accuse, in which he lays out the case that Dreyfus was wrongly convicted. In 1899, so this is 5 years after he was sentenced to Devil's Island, a new trial came up for Dreyfus. And he was convicted again. And they gave him a new 10-year sentence. Eventually, Dreyfus was pardoned, and he was set free. And then finally, in 1906, he was fully exonerated, and he was restored to his rank as captain in the army. But it was a very, and it is such a sort of well-known case of anti-Semitism in France. Why did they go after him? Because he was Jewish. That's why. There was no evidence, and it was all made up, and it was clearly made up. But he was Jewish, and so they went after him. Esterhazy, I believe, is Hungarian. I would be willing to bet it's Hungarian. But this is the guy who actually did it. So then, moving on, this was in 1906. Now, we can clearly understand in the early 1900s, we have waves of immigration from Eastern Europe. We have seen this in every country that we've studied so far, waves of immigration following the assassination of Tsar Alexander II in 1881 and the pogroms that ensued. So we see this time and time again, every country. Eastern European and Russian Jews fleeing the pogroms went wherever they could. France happened to be a pretty good country for them to go to. Starting in the 1920s, you had a group of heavily assimilated Jews who had already been there for many years. These were Jews who had assimilated into society, who had achieved status, who had achieved wealth. And all of a sudden, from 1900 to 1939, you have 200,000 Jews coming from Eastern Europe who spoke Yiddish. They were from Russia, they were from Poland, they were even some from Germany, and they were Ashkenazic Jews. And they were not wealthy, and they were not educated. Where have we seen this also? We saw this in the United States, exactly. All of you said that. Yes, we saw this. Remember, we talked a little bit about this, that the first wave of immigrants to New York especially were from Germany. They were educated, they were wealthy, and they were assimilated, and they assimilated into American society in New York and rose to positions of stature and wealth. And then at the same time that Jews were fleeing and went to France, they had also come to the United States. But these Jews were poor. They were ultra-religious. They believed in folk law. You know, you'd Shluggin Kaporis, you take the rooster and the chicken and you... And the German Jews who were educated looked at these people and said, oh my God, you are such an embarrassment to Jews. So it caused real tension in New York. There were some of the wealthy Jews who tried to help, but by and large, it was a huge embarrassment for them. And the same thing happened in France. The new arrivals, who were poor and uneducated and believed in folk law, they got along pretty poorly with the established elite. Folk law, folk, superstitions, the evil eye. There are a number, superstitions. And we have so much of our tradition that is based in superstition. And we take it as, oh, okay, that's just what it is. You know, quick aside, at a Jewish funeral, we put 1, 3, or 5, an odd number of shovelfuls of dirt on the casket. Why do we do that? Who can't divide and go into the middle? The evil spirits can't divide and go into the middle. Okay, anyone else? Why do we do that? If you ask 10 rabbis, you're going to get 10 different answers. Nobody knows why. I'll give you a little hint of what I think. Because in one of my Talmud study classes, I came across this incredibly wonderful passage from the Talmud. In our tradition, we have an evil spirit, and his name is Asmodeus. And he appears in the Second Temple literature in the book of, I think it's Enoch. And Asmodeus is a demon. And what the Talmud says is that the person who goes into the tavern and has 2 drinks, he comes out and he says he had 3. Why? Because the demon Asmodeus goes after people who had 2 drinks. So the idea of an even number, the Asmodeus comes after you. So you go out and you say, oh, I had 3 drinks tonight, to fool the demon. I think the superstition arose from that because it's too interesting and too coincidental. All right, so we have a lot of folk law, a lot of superstitions. We all know that, a lot of superstitions. Okay. By the time World War II comes along in 1940, there are 330,000 Jews in France. By this time, most of the French Jews had moved to Paris. So you find most of the Jewish population in Paris. However, we know that the Nazis invade. And the Nazis invade, and a large portion, at least 1/3 of France, comes under a Nazi sympathizing government called the Vichy government. Yes, Vichy, Vichy France. And these were sympathizers with the Nazi regime. And de Gaulle, as we know, was in London at the time. He had left, and he was protesting this from outside the country. In 1941, we have the first roundup of Jews, and in 1942, the first deportations to concentration camps. Yes, Herb. So Herb says he has a relative on his mother's side who married an American citizen and moved to Paris. Take your time. He passed away. She was there with her 2 daughters. The Vichy government picked her up and sent her to a concentration camp. Who was saved? The 2 girls were saved by Catholic nuns. And these nuns kept the children during the whole war and took care of them, since they were American citizens. Who brought them? Your uncle. Your uncle brought them ultimately to the United States, the 2 girls. Wow, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Let me get the mic. Come over here. Because I think this is important.
I believe that Vichy government was in the south of France, and that was the part that was not occupied by Germans. They had like autonomy, kind of autonomy in that southern part of France. So in Paris, there were the Germans, when they occupied France, they took over the northern part, and the south was kind of independent.
Yes. So that's what we mean by the Vichy government controlled at least a third of French territory. At least a third of French territory. Yes, that's correct. And you see exactly where Vichy is. We're pretty much in the middle. Little bit to the east, a little slightly south of the middle. Okay, thank you for sharing that, Herb. Yes. After the Holocaust, then we have the 40s, we have the 50s, and we have the 60s. And what we see is a very large migration from northern Africa.
So, Rabbi, before you, whatever happened to the Vichy government? Were these people prosecuted? The French Vichy regime? That was
Yeah, sure. Because, for instance, wasn't Klaus Barbie part of the? I think so. The leadership was punished. Yes, yes, yes. They were held accountable. How? I don't have those numbers. I'm sorry. But the population, what did we say, was about 330,000, and it had to have been a large portion that were sent away. I'll try to get that number as well for you. Yes.
Yeah, Nadia's like a historian.
I know that a lot of French were involved in underground resistance against Germans' occupation and Nazis, and many of them were part of Communist Party, and many of those communists were Jews, and they were protected by this resistance. They were part of it. My sister's mother-in-law was protected by them. She was part of French resistance and protected by them, got a new identity and so on. So I think those who were involved in resistance, they were saved, but others were not.
Thank you. Thank you. I love it when all of you contribute. It's wonderful. It's wonderful because each of you knows something, and so that's great. So during the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, right after the war, you had a huge migration of Jews from northern Africa. As we said, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, these were French territories, and they were exiting during a pretty much a mass exodus of Jews from Arab Muslim countries. And we know that, so we've talked about this a number of times. So Israel is born, the state is born in 1948. We have immediately a war for independence, and there is a huge population exchange. Jews from many, many, many Arab countries are forced out and their property confiscated, and Arab Muslims are either leave on their own or are forced to leave Israel. And so we had this sort of mass exodus of Jews from Arab Muslim countries. And a lot of them went to Israel. Why? Because Israel was now established, and it was like, of course we're going to Israel. That only makes sense. We're going to Israel. But these French-speaking North African Jews felt much more comfortable in France because they spoke the language. There were a lot of Arabs who migrated to France as well. Yes, absolutely true. Yes, and we see that today. In 1951, there were 250,000 Jews. So there had been 330 in 1940. So that's approximately 100,000 that probably were. So that it must have been more than that. Sure. And by 1968, the Sephardic Jews from North Africa became the majority population of Jews in France. So France has an enormous population of Northern African Jews, basically. And you mentioned before, Jim, about the 1980 Paris synagogue bombing, carried out probably by neo-Nazis. And so what we know today is that France has the largest population of Jews in Europe. It has the third largest population of Jews in the world, behind Israel first and the United States second. No, France is third. So Argentina has to be way up there, but from all of my research, France comes in third. A lot of Argentinian Jews have left for the United States. There is increased anti-Semitism starting in 2000, because also France has a large population. We said France has a large population of Northern African Jews, but it also has a very large population of Arab Muslims. And so there is a lot of tension between these communities. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict causes a lot of tension within those communities. And tension based on the fact that Israel was allowed to become a state in the first place. I'm sure that everyone is aware that a lot of French Jews have taken a second home in Israel in case they have to leave right away. There's a lot in Netanya and there's a lot in Jerusalem. How did you find out about that? Your daughter lives in Baka, in Jerusalem. And there are all these new apartments that are being built. And the French didn't move in there, so that there were all these empty apartments. And the shopkeepers weren't getting the business. Ah, so all these empty apartments are second apartments from these French Jews who sort of buy them as an insurance policy in case they have to leave.
So currently, temporarily, is there...
Hold on.
In the current day, is there anti-Semitism among the non-Arab French population? Or is it primarily from, the North African Arabs, Muslims who have moved to France?
What do you think?
Well, there was the case of that prime minister in 1980 who made that obnoxious statement.
I think the answer is yeah, definitely, and by both. Certainly you have it from the Muslim Arab public, but you also have it from the French citizens. And, what the law says and what is supposed to happen in society is very different from what actually happens in society. So we, obviously here in the United States, all men, all people are created equal. Well, I think for a large segment of the population, some people are created more equal than others. And there is significant hatred against Jews. Also, there's significant hatred against black people and against minority groups. Yes, everyone who's not white and Christian. Yes. And the same thing happens in France. I think the official stance of the government is equality, liberty, fraternity, just as we saw. But the practice of the people is different. Generally speaking, people don't like to be with people who are not like them. And this is especially true of, well, I don't want to make a blanket statement, but I think Caucasians, white people, tend to feel that more than others, unfortunately. And so France definitely has that situation, just like we have it here in the United States. Didn't they have a French president who was Jewish? Sarkozy. Yes. And in fact, the Jews have risen to the highest levels of government and banking everywhere. And that fuels a lot of the anti-Semitism. Over the break, we were talking about the fact that in the United States, there are those who say that, the Jews are taking over. The Jews control all the money. The Jews, And, well, if you look at the boards and the higher administrative positions of many banks and financial institutions and institutions on Wall Street, you will find a lot of Jews, even in the upper echelons of the government, of administration, of the president's administration. Lots of Jews. And the question then becomes why? Yes, I think that's right. I think it's education. I think it's all education. Say again? It's also networking. Yes, networking, but I think, yes, definitely. And I think education plays an enormous part. I will suspect that all of us here in this room had a very similar encouragement, shall we say, from when we were little. Education, 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 education. Go to school. When I was growing up, I didn't even, until my first year at Stanford, when I looked at my roommate and he said I wasn't planning on going to college, and I said, you mean you don't have to go to college? I didn't know college was optional. Never knew it, never. Because it was my father from day one. It's not a matter of, it's where you're going to school. You're going to go to the best college you can possibly get into. I didn't know anything else. And I think that's true for a lot of us. It was definitely true for a lot of Jews, especially coming over from Eastern Europe. Yes? Come on down now.
My parents went through Holocaust. They were not in camps, they were in England, but my father always told me and my two sisters that we have to get educated because what you have in your head, nobody can take away from you. Everything else, they can, and they may take, but not education.
Knowledge is king. That's exactly right. And so Jews as a group have always pushed education first, always. And you know where we see that now more than ever? Not in the Jewish groups anymore, but among immigrant groups. We've seen it in the Asian population. Absolutely, absolutely. And so it's also no surprise whatsoever that especially in technology and data and everything, we see many, many very smart Asian men and women breaking into that industry. We see it absolutely. They are the future of America. Yeah. Yes. So I think it's all about education. All right. That's what I have for today. Thank you for putting up with me for our 2 sessions.
I want to thank you for doing it.
Yes, Joette, please.
So during World War II, one of the most infamous acts was the roundup of Jews who were sent to the Valdiv, the Velodrome d'Hiver, which is the winter indoor cycling track. It was for bicycle races. But they rounded up Jews in Paris, and there were like 5,000 Jews rounded up and put into this building prior to their deportation. They were in that building for 3 days, no food, no water, no nothing, no facilities, and it was the middle of summer and it was very hot. And I don't know how it happened, but the information about this came to light in recent years. I remember seeing a movie about it. I remember reading a book about it, but the actual building was destroyed. There is a small monument, a plaque on the ground which indicates the location of where it was. And this happened in July of, I think, 42. And every year now, since it's been brought back to light, there is a commemoration there. But in addition, even more recently, there was a statue built, a very moving statue closer to the Seine than that building was, of a family with their suitcase, the children, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful statue of a family being taken to the Val d'Ive. And the last time I was in Paris, I was able to go to this monument and see it, and I was there in the summer, so there were flowers still left at the monument because it was right after the anniversary. And in addition, I saw this new statue which had recently been dedicated not too long before I had been there. It's quite a moving statue, and it was I don't know why it stayed out of the public information eye for so long, but I was glad to see that it was highlighted.
Thank you for telling us about that. And to end class today, Ken has a very fun fact about the guillotine.
Yes, the guillotine was operated by one particular family from generation to generation. And at the time of the French Revolution, the guy was Charles Henry Sanson. And he was the chief executioner. And it was considered inhumane to use a sword to behead people. So they devised the guillotine, and anybody in the nobility that was to be executed, it had to be with the guillotine. And he traveled with it. It disassembled, went on trains, and he did all of his executions with the same guillotine. And he didn't get married, so it died out and they stopped using it.
Wow.
Yeah, you know what? I had heard about
Thank you.
that. So it was inherited. You know, his sons took over the guillotine. So it was a family project.
Yep.
Which is a horrible thing to say, but it was. Yeah. Thank you, Rabbi. You know, you're a special person to do this for us.
No problem.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Have a good week.
Okay, so we've got
shouldn't do anything.